In a small, sleepy village surrounded by endless fields of golden wheat and lush green pastures, there lived a boy named Ethan. His family was among the poorest in the area, owning only a modest farm that barely produced enough to keep food on their table. The house they lived in was simple, a creaky wooden structure with chipped paint and a leaky roof. But it was home. For Ethan, it wasn't about what he lacked. It was about finding joy in the little things. He loved watching the sunrise over the hills, listening to the birds chirp as he worked alongside his father, and feeling the earth beneath his feet when he helped till the soil. Ethan's days started early. Before dawn broke, he would rise, slip into his patched-up clothes, and head out to milk the cows or gather eggs from the chicken coop. After finishing his morning chores, he grabbed his worn-out school bag, its straps frayed and fabric faded, and hurried down the dirt road toward the village school. It wasn't much of a journey, just a 10-minute walk, but every step reminded him of how different his life was compared to most of the other kids in town. At school, Ethan stood out, not because he was exceptional in academics or sports, but because of his appearance. His shoes had holes in them, his shirt was always slightly too big, a hand-me-down from his cousin, and his hands were often stained with dirt no matter how hard he scrubbed. These details didn't bother Ethan much. He knew his family did their best, but they made him an easy target for ridicule. The ringleader of the bullies was Jake, the son of the wealthiest man in the village. Jake's father owned several acres of farmland, hired workers to do all the heavy lifting, and drove a shiny red tractor that everyone admired. Growing up privileged, Jake had never known struggle. To him, Ethan represented everything he looked down upon: poverty, simplicity, and humility. And so, Jake took every opportunity to mock Ethan, flanked by his loyal group of friends who laughed at his cruel jokes. "Hey, mud boy," Jake called one day during recess, his voice cutting through the chatter of students playing tag nearby. Ethan froze mid-step, clutching his lunchbox tightly. He recognized that nickname. It was one Jake had invented after seeing Ethan come to school covered in mud following a particularly rainy morning. "Still wearing those raggedy shoes? Don't you know we're supposed to wear proper uniforms here?" The crowd around them snickered. Ethan tried to ignore the comment, keeping his gaze fixed on the ground as he walked toward the shade of the old oak tree where he usually ate alone. But Jake wasn't done yet. With a smirk, he stepped in front of Ethan, blocking his path. "What's wrong? Scared to talk? Or are you too dumb to even understand words?" Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to say something clever, something brave, but the lump in his throat wouldn't let him speak. Instead, he sidestepped Jake and continued walking, hoping to escape before things escalated further. Unfortunately, Jake followed, egged on by the laughter of his friends. "You hear that, guys?" Jake announced loudly, making sure everyone within earshot could hear. "Mudboy doesn't have anything to say because he knows I'm right. Look at him, his clothes are falling. Apart, his hair looks like a bird's nest, and his bag probably has more holes than fabric." The insult stung, but Ethan refused to give Jake the satisfaction of seeing him cry. Instead, he focused on counting his breaths, trying to steady his racing heart. This wasn't the first time Jake had singled him out, and it likely wouldn't be the last. Over the years, Ethan had learned to tune out the taunts as best he could, telling himself that Jake's words didn't define him. Still, it was exhausting, carrying the weight of constant judgment day after day. Despite the bullying, Ethan had qualities that set him apart from others, though few people noticed them. For instance, he possessed an incredible imagination. While other boys dreamed of becoming athletes or firefighters, Ethan spent hours sketching pictures of animals, landscapes, and fantastical creatures in the margins of his notebooks. He also had a natural talent for working with his hands. On weekends, when he wasn't helping his father on the farm, Ethan liked to collect scraps of wood from the barn and carve them into shapes using a small knife his grandfather had given him. At first, his creations were clumsy, a misshapen horse here, a lopsided bird there, but with practice, they began to take form. Each carving held meaning for Ethan, whether it represented a memory, a dream, or simply a moment of peace. One of his proudest pieces was a tiny wooden sparrow. He had carved it late one night, sitting cross-legged on the porch while the stars twinkled above. The sparrow symbolized freedom, something Ethan longed for deep down. Whenever he felt overwhelmed by Jake's taunts or the challenges of daily life, he would hold the sparrow in his palm and remind himself that someday, somehow he would soar beyond his circumstances. But for now, freedom felt like a distant dream. As Ethan sat under the oak tree eating his meager lunch, a slice of bread and a piece of cheese wrapped in brown paper, he couldn't help but wonder if things would ever change. Would Jake and his friends ever leave him alone? Would anyone see him for who he truly was instead of judging him based on his appearance? These questions lingered in his mind, unanswered, as the bell rang, signaling the end of recess. As he trudged back to class, Ethan resolved to stay strong. He may not have fancy clothes or shiny shoes, but he had something money couldn't buy: resilience. And though he didn't realize it yet, this quiet determination would soon lead him down a path that would change not only his life, but also the lives of those around him, including Jake. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind where the air carried a faint chill and leaves crunched underfoot with every step. Ethan had just finished another long day at school, his mind preoccupied with thoughts of the evening chores waiting for him back at the farm. His father needed help repairing a section of the fence that had been damaged in last week's storm, and there were still potatoes to dig up before the frost set in. With these responsibilities weighing on his mind, Ethan barely noticed the group of boys trailing behind him as he made his way toward the old oak tree near the edge of the schoolyard. The oak tree was a familiar spot for Ethan. Its gnarled branches stretched high into the sky, providing shade during hot summer days and shelter from the occasional rain shower. It was also one of the few places where Ethan could find a moment of peace after enduring hours of ridicule inside the classroom walls. But today that sense of calm would be shattered. "Well, look who we have here," came a voice dripping with mockery. Ethan froze, recognizing it immediately. Jake, flanked by his usual entourage of followers, stood a few feet away, blocking Ethan's path. Mudboy decided to show his face again. "I thought maybe you'd learned your lesson and stayed home." "Today." Ethan didn't respond. He tightened his grip on his patched-up backpack, trying to keep his expression neutral. Experience had taught him that responding only fueled Jake's cruelty. Ignoring him seemed like the safest option, but Jake wasn't about to let Ethan off so easily. "Hey, check this out," Jake exclaimed, reaching forward and snatching something from Ethan's hand before he could react. It was Ethan's prized possession, a small wooden carving of a bird. The sparrow, delicate and lifelike, had taken weeks to perfect. Every curve of its wings, every detail of its feathers, had been painstakingly crafted using nothing more than a dull knife and scraps of wood salvaged from the barn. To Ethan, it wasn't just a piece of art. It was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even someone like him could create something beautiful despite his circumstances. Jake held the carving aloft, inspecting it with exaggerated curiosity. "What is this, some kind of pathetic toy?" he sneered, turning it over in his hands. His friends laughed nervously, unsure whether to join in but unwilling to risk crossing Jake. "Seriously, Mudboy, do you really think anyone cares about this junk?" Ethan felt his chest tighten. He wanted to snatch the carving back to tell Jake exactly how much it meant to him, but fear rooted him to the spot. Instead, he stared silently at Jake, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. The laughter around him grew louder, echoing in his ears like a cruel symphony. "Oh, come on," Jake continued, tossing the carving into the air and catching it carelessly. "You can't seriously expect us to believe you actually made this thing. Did your daddy help you with it? Or did you steal it from someone who actually knows what they're doing?" Each word pierced deeper than the last, but Ethan refused to give Jake the satisfaction of seeing him break. He kept his gaze steady, focusing on the ground rather than the faces of the boys surrounding him. Somewhere deep inside, a tiny spark of defiance flickered to life. He reminded himself that Jake's words didn't define him, that no matter how hard Jake tried, he couldn't take away Ethan's ability to dream, to create, to hope. But Jake wasn't done yet. With a smirk, he raised the carving high above his head and brought it crashing down onto the ground with all his might. The sound of cracking wood echoed through the clearing, followed by a collective gasp from the onlookers. For a brief moment, even Jake seemed surprised by his own actions. The once beautiful sparrow lay shattered into pieces, its fragile form reduced to splinters and dust. "There," Jake said finally, brushing his hands together as if wiping away dirt. "That's better. Now it matches the rest of your trashy life." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Jake's friends looked uneasy, shifting uncomfortably as they waited for Ethan's reaction. Would he cry? Scream? Lunge at Jake in anger? None of those things happened. Instead, Ethan simply stood there, his eyes fixed on the broken remains of his carving. Slowly, deliberately, he bent down and picked up the largest fragment, a jagged piece of wood shaped vaguely like a wing. He turned it over in his fingers, examining it closely as though searching for some hidden meaning in its destruction. Then, without saying a word, Ethan straightened up and began walking away. His movements were calm, almost serene, as if the weight of the world hadn't just crushed him beneath its heel. The bullies watched in stunned silence, their taunts dying on their lips. For the first time, Jake's confidence faltered. He opened his mouth to call after Ethan, perhaps to gloat or demand an explanation, but no words came out. Something about Ethan's quiet resolve unnerved him. As Ethan disappeared down the dusty road leading toward his farm, Jake and his friends exchanged uneasy glances. None of them understood what had just happened, or why it left them feeling strangely unsettled. They had expected tears, rage, anything but the eerie calmness that Ethan displayed. In that moment they realized, though none of them dared admit it aloud, that Ethan was different. There was something about him, something unshakable that defied their attempts to tear him down. Back at the farm, Ethan sat alone on the porch steps, holding the broken fragment of his carving in his palm. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. Though his heart ached with loss, Ethan found himself reflecting not on what had been destroyed, but on what could still be created. He thought about the hours he had spent carving the sparrow, the joy he had felt when it finally took shape, and the pride he had taken in sharing it with the world, even if only briefly. And then, an idea began to form in his mind. What if he used this pain, this injustice, as fuel for something greater? What if, instead of letting Jake's cruelty define him, he channeled it into his craft? The spark of defiance that had ignited earlier now burned brighter, illuminating a path forward. Ethan didn't know it yet, but this moment, the breaking of his beloved sparrow, would become the catalyst for a transformation that would leave the entire village speechless. For now, though, Ethan simply sat in silence, staring out at the fields bathed in golden light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and perhaps even new creations. And while Jake and his friends might never understand the depth of Ethan's resilience, one thing was certain. Ethan was ready to rise above their cruelty and prove that true strength lies not in fighting back, but in creating something beautiful out of the ashes. The days that followed the incident under the old oak tree were far from easy for Ethan. The memory of his broken sparrow lingered in his mind like a ghost, haunting him with every glance at the pile of wood scraps in the corner of the barn. But instead of letting bitterness consume him, Ethan made a decision, a quiet, determined choice to turn his pain into purpose. He realized that while Jake and his friends could destroy a single carving, they couldn't take away his ability to create. If anything, their cruelty had only deepened his resolve to prove that his talent was real, and that he was more than the labels they tried to pin on him. Each evening, after finishing his chores on the farm, Ethan retreated to the small wooden workbench his father had set up for him in the barn. It wasn't much, just an old plank supported by 2 sawhorses, but it became his sanctuary. Here, surrounded by the scent of hay and the soft rustling of wind through the cracks in the walls, Ethan poured his heart into his craft. He began experimenting with new designs, pushing himself to improve with every piece he created. At first, his hands trembled as he carved, the sting of Jake's words still fresh in his mind. But over time, the rhythm of the knife against the wood became soothing, almost meditative. With each stroke, he felt a little stronger, a little freer. Ethan's early works were simple. small animals like rabbits, squirrels, and deer. But as his confidence grew, so did the complexity of his carvings. He started crafting larger pieces, a proud rooster perched atop a fence post, a graceful swan with its neck curved elegantly, and even a life-sized owl with intricate feathers etched into its wings. Each sculpture told a story, capturing moments of beauty and resilience that mirrored Ethan's own journey. The rooster symbolized courage, the swan represented grace under pressure, and the owl stood for wisdom gained through hardship. For Ethan, these weren't just objects. They were expressions of his inner world, a way to communicate what words alone could never convey. Word of Ethan's talent began to spread quietly through the village, though he didn't realize it at first. One day, as he helped his father sell vegetables at the local market, a neighbor stopped by their stall and complimented the small wooden fox Ethan had placed on display. "Did you make this?" the woman asked, her eyes wide with admiration. When Ethan nodded shyly, she insisted on buying it, offering more money than the vegetable basket she had originally come for. Encouraged by her enthusiasm, Ethan brought a few more carvings to the market the following week. To his surprise, they sold quickly, and soon people began asking specifically about his work. His father, who had always been supportive but cautious about encouraging Ethan's hobby, watched with pride as his son's creations gained attention. "You've got a gift, boy," he said one evening, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Those words meant the world to Ethan, reinforcing the belief that he was capable of achieving something meaningful despite the challenges he faced. As demand for his carvings grew, Ethan found himself working late into the night, illuminated only by the flickering light of a kerosene lamp. His fingers were often sore and calloused from hours of carving, but he didn't mind. Each finished piece filled him with a sense of accomplishment that no amount of bullying could diminish. He began dreaming bigger, imagining his sculptures, displayed in galleries or shops far beyond the borders of their humble village. Yet he remained grounded, knowing that success wouldn't come overnight. For now he focused on honing his skills and sharing his art with those around him. One fateful afternoon, a traveling merchant named Mr. Hargrove visited the village. Known for his keen eye for unique goods, Mr. Hargrove wandered through the market stalls, inspecting handmade wares and striking deals with local artisans. When he reached Ethan's family stall, he paused, drawn to a striking carving of a galloping horse. Its muscular form and flowing mane seemed to capture motion, itself frozen in time. "Who made this?" Mr. Hargrove asked, picking up the sculpture and turning it over in his hands. "That would be my son," Ethan's father replied, gesturing toward Ethan, who stood nearby arranging baskets of potatoes. Ethan stepped forward hesitantly, unsure of how to respond. Mr. Hargrove studied him carefully, then smiled. "Young man, this is remarkable work. Where did you learn to carve like this?" Ethan shrugged modestly. "I just practice a lot. My grandfather taught me the basics, but most of it I figured out myself." Mr. Hargrove nodded approvingly. "Well, you have a natural talent. Tell me, do you have more pieces like this? I'd be interested in purchasing them for my shop in the city." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The idea of his carvings being sold in a city store felt surreal, like something out of a dream. He hurried home and gathered all the sculptures he had stored in the barn, presenting them to Mr. Hargrove later that day. The merchant examined each piece thoroughly, his expression growing increasingly impressed. By the end of their meeting, he offered Ethan a generous sum for the entire collection, promising to pay fairly for any future works he produced. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt a glimmer of financial security. The money he earned allowed him to buy supplies for the farm, repair his father's tools, and even purchase a new pair of shoes. But more importantly, it gave him a sense of validation. People were willing to pay for his art, not because they pitied him, but because they genuinely appreciated its beauty and craftsmanship. This realization ignited a fire within him, fueling his determination to keep creating and improving. Meanwhile, Jake and his gang remained oblivious to Ethan's newfound success. They continued to mock him whenever their paths crossed, unaware that their insults no longer held any power over him. Ethan had learned to carry himself with quiet confidence, refusing to let their taunts shake his focus. There were moments when he considered confronting them, perhaps showing them his carvings to prove how wrong they were about him. But he decided against it, knowing that seeking revenge would only lower him to their level. Instead, he chose to let his work speak for itself, trusting that the truth would eventually reveal itself in due time. As weeks turned into months, Ethan's reputation as a talented artist continued to grow. Villagers who once dismissed him as Mud Boy now greeted him with respect, marveling at the skill and dedication behind his creations. Even teachers at the school began praising his efforts, encouraging other students to follow his example. Though Ethan remained humble, he couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. Every sale, every compliment, and every smile directed his way served as proof that he was more than the cruel labels assigned to him by bullies. But Ethan knew that his journey was far from over. While he had proven his worth to himself and many others, there were still those who doubted him, people like Jake, who clung stubbornly to their prejudices. Deep down, Ethan wondered if Jake would ever see him for who he truly was. Would he recognize the depth of Ethan's talent, or would he continue to dismiss him as someone unworthy of respect? Unbeknownst to Ethan, fate had other plans. In the coming months, an opportunity would arise that would force Jake and the entire village to confront the reality of Ethan's brilliance. Until then, Ethan remained focused on his craft, carving not just wood but also a brighter future for himself. With each new sculpture, he chipped away at the barriers that had once held him back, proving that true strength lies not in fighting back but in rising above. And though he didn't know it yet, his greatest triumph was just around the corner. Months had passed since Ethan's carvings first caught the attention of Mr. Hargrove, the traveling merchant. In that time, his life had transformed in ways he could never have imagined. The once quiet farm boy was now known throughout the village as a gifted artist, and his sculptures were sought after not only by locals but also by customers from nearby towns who visited the market specifically to see his work. Despite his growing fame, Ethan remained humble, continuing to pour his heart into each piece with the same dedication that had defined him from the start. One crisp spring morning, as Ethan polished a newly finished carving of a soaring eagle, his father approached him with an unusual look on his face. "Ethan," he said, holding out a folded piece of paper, "this came for you today." Curious, Ethan wiped his hands on his shirt and unfolded the note. It was an invitation, a formal letter addressed to him, from the mayor of their village. The annual art exhibition, sponsored by none other than Jake's father, was set to take place in just 2 weeks. Artists from neighboring towns would gather to showcase their finest works, and Ethan's name had been added to the list of participants. His father beamed with pride as Ethan read the words over and over, hardly believing what he was seeing. "This is incredible," Ethan exclaimed, his voice tinged with both excitement and disbelief. "How did they even hear about me?" His father chuckled. "Word spreads fast when someone as talented as you shows up. People talk, Ethan. Your carvings aren't just beautiful, they're inspiring. Whoever organized this must have heard about you and decided you deserved a spot." Though flattered, Ethan couldn't help but feel nervous. He had always carved for himself and his community, never imagining his work would be displayed alongside professional artists. What if his pieces weren't good enough? What if people laughed at him, just like Jake and his friends used to do? These doubts swirled in his mind, but he quickly reminded himself of how far he'd come. If he could survive the taunts of bullies and turn his pain into art, surely he could handle whatever came next. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan worked tirelessly to prepare for the exhibition. He chose 3 of his most intricate sculptures to display: the majestic eagle with wings spread wide, a serene doe resting under a tree, and a playful otter clutching a fish in its mouth. Each piece represented a different aspect of his journey: the strength to rise above adversity, the peace he found in nature, and the joy of creating something meaningful. As he carefully packed them into crates lined with straw, he felt a mix of anticipation and determination. This wasn't just about showing off his talent, it was about proving to himself, and to everyone else, that he belonged. On the day of The exhibition, the entire village turned out to celebrate. The town square had been transformed into a vibrant gallery, with colorful banners fluttering overhead and rows of tables displaying paintings, pottery, jewelry, and sculptures. Vendors sold snacks and drinks while musicians played lively tunes in the background. Children ran between the stalls, giggling and pointing at the dazzling array of artwork. It was a festive atmosphere, filled with energy and excitement. Ethan arrived early, helping the organizers set up his display. When the mayor himself stopped by to inspect the arrangements, he paused in front of Ethan's table, visibly impressed. "These are extraordinary," he said, running his fingers gently along the edge of the eagle sculpture. "You've truly captured the essence of your subjects. I'm glad we invited you." Ethan thanked him, feeling a surge of confidence, but as the crowd began to gather, his nerves returned. What if no one noticed his work? What if it was overshadowed by the more experienced artists? Just as he started to second-guess himself, he spotted Jake and his gang strolling through the square. They were laughing loudly, clearly enjoying themselves, and Ethan braced himself for another round of mockery. Sure enough, Jake soon wandered over to Ethan's booth, his usual smug grin plastered across his face. "What's this?" he sneered, gesturing toward the sculptures. "Did you bring some more of your little toys to show off?" Before Ethan could respond, a woman standing nearby interjected. "Actually, young man, these are quite remarkable," she said, giving Jake a disapproving glance. "I don't think I've ever seen such detail in wooden carvings before. Who made these?" Ethan cleared his throat and stepped forward. "I did," he said simply, meeting her gaze with quiet confidence. The woman nodded approvingly. "Well, you should be proud. This eagle in particular is breathtaking." She turned to the others around her. "Come take a look at this. It's absolutely stunning." Within moments, a small crowd had gathered around Ethan's display. People marveled at the lifelike quality of his sculptures, asking questions about his techniques and inspirations. Some even took photos, promising to share them with friends and family. Ethan answered their queries politely, feeling a warmth spread through his chest as he realized how much his work meant to others. Jake, however, looked increasingly uncomfortable. He shifted from foot to foot, glancing nervously at his friends, who seemed equally unsure of what to say. Finally, unable to stand being ignored any longer, he blurted out, "Yeah, well, anyone can carve wood. It's not that big of a deal." His comment fell flat. Several people turned to glare at him, shaking their heads in disbelief. One elderly man, leaning heavily on his cane, stepped forward and addressed Jake directly. "Young man, talent like this doesn't come easily. It takes patience, skill, and a lot of hard work, qualities that are sorely lacking in people who waste their time tearing others down." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Jake flushed red with embarrassment. For the first time in his life, he found himself speechless. As the attention shifted back to Ethan, Jake slunk away, disappearing into the throng of visitors. By the end of the day, Ethan's booth had become one of the highlights of the exhibition. Many attendees praised his creativity and craftsmanship, and several expressed interest in commissioning custom pieces. Even Jake's father, who had initially dismissed Ethan as just a farm boy, stopped by to congratulate him. "I underestimated you," he admitted gruffly, extending his hand. "You've got real talent, son. Keep at it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the square, Ethan stood back and surveyed the scene. His sculptures, once hidden away in the barn, were now admired by dozens of people. More importantly, they served as a testament to his resilience and passion, a reminder that true strength comes not from fighting back but from rising above. But the best part of the evening was yet to come. Just as Ethan was packing up his display, Jake approached him hesitantly, his usual arrogance replaced by an awkward uncertainty. "Hey," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. "Look, I just wanted to say, sorry. About everything." Ethan blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected an apology, especially not from Jake. After a moment's pause, he smiled softly. "Thanks," he said. "It means a lot." Jake nodded, still looking uncomfortable. but there was a flicker of sincerity in his expression. "Your stuff is really good," he added lamely. "Better than anything I could ever do." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. Though forgiveness didn't come easily, Ethan knew that holding on to anger would only weigh him down. Instead, he chose to focus on the future, a future where his art could inspire others, just as it had inspired him to overcome his struggles. As he carried the empty crates back home, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. He had faced his fears, silenced his doubters, and proven that beauty can emerge from pain. And though challenges might still lie ahead, he knew he had the strength to face them, one carving at a time. The days following the art exhibition were unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. The once quiet farm boy was now a local hero, celebrated not only for his talent but also for his humility and perseverance. People from all corners of the village, neighbors, teachers, shopkeepers, stopped by the farm to congratulate him or simply to chat about his journey. Some shared stories of their own struggles, inspired by how Ethan had turned hardship into something beautiful. Others offered advice on how he could take his artistry even further, suggesting ideas like entering regional competitions or applying for scholarships at prestigious art schools in the city. Ethan listened to everyone with gratitude, carefully, considering their suggestions. He knew that while the exhibition had been a turning point, it wasn't the end of his story. It was just the beginning. For the first time in his life, he allowed himself to dream bigger. What if he could make a career out of his craft? What if his sculptures could inspire people far beyond the borders of his small village? These thoughts filled him with excitement, though they also came with doubts. Could he really leave behind the only home he'd ever known? Was he ready to face the challenges that awaited him in the wider world? His father noticed the change in him immediately. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, his father spoke up. "You're thinking about leaving, aren't you?" he asked gently, his voice tinged with both pride and sadness. Ethan hesitated before nodding. "I think I need to, Dad. Not forever, but maybe for a little while. There's so much more I want to learn, places I want to see. And I feel like this is my chance." His father sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. "I won't lie, it'll be hard seeing you go. This farm has been our family's lifeblood for generations. But Ethan," he said, turning to look at his son with a warm smile, "you've got a gift too big to stay hidden here. If going away means you can grow into the artist and the man you're meant to be, then I'll support you every step of the way." Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes as he hugged his father tightly. It was moments like these that reminded him why he worked so hard, not just for himself but for the people who believed in him, who had sacrificed so much to give him opportunities. His decision to leave wouldn't be easy, but it would be worth it. In the weeks that followed, Ethan began preparing for the next chapter of his life. With the money he'd earned from selling his carvings, he bought supplies and tools he'd need to continue honing his craft. He also started researching art programs and workshops in nearby cities, determined to find the right fit. Meanwhile, his reputation continued to spread. Mr. Hargrove, the traveling merchant, introduced Ethan to a network of artists and gallery owners who encouraged him to showcase his work in larger exhibitions. One such opportunity came when a curator from the capital city invited Ethan to participate in an upcoming show featuring emerging talents from rural areas. When the day finally arrived for Ethan to leave for the city, the entire village turned out to bid him farewell. Neighbors brought homemade pies and jars of preserves, offering words of encouragement and blessings for his journey. Even Jake showed up, standing awkwardly near the edge of the crowd with his hands shoved into his pockets. When Ethan approached him, Jake cleared his throat nervously. "Good luck out there," he mumbled, extending his hand. "And, thanks for not holding a grudge against me." Ethan shook his hand firmly, smiling. "We all make mistakes, Jake. What matters is what we do after we realize them. You've already taken the first step by apologizing. That takes courage." Jake nodded, looking genuinely moved. As Ethan climbed onto the bus that would take him to the city, he glanced back one last time at the faces of those who had shaped his life, their smiles, their tears, their unwavering support. It was a bittersweet moment, but he felt ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. Life in the city was overwhelming at first. The noise, the crowds, the fast pace, all of it was a stark contrast to the quiet simplicity of village life. But Ethan quickly adapted, finding solace in his work. In his tiny rented apartment, he set up a makeshift studio where he spent countless hours perfecting his technique. The city offered new inspirations, skyscrapers reaching toward the clouds, bustling streets teeming with life, and museums filled with masterpieces that pushed him to experiment and innovate. Slowly but surely, his style evolved, blending the rustic charm of his roots with the sophistication of urban influences. His breakthrough came during the exhibition in the capital city. One of his pieces, a towering sculpture of a phoenix rising from ashes, caught the eye of a renowned art critic. The critic wrote a glowing review, praising Ethan's ability to convey emotion and resilience through his work. Within days, galleries were clamoring to represent him, and commissions poured in from collectors eager to own a piece of his art. Suddenly, Ethan found himself thrust into the spotlight, his name mentioned alongside established artists. Despite his newfound fame, Ethan remained grounded. He often returned to his village, bringing gifts for his father and sharing stories of his adventures. During these visits, he made it a point to speak with young people, especially those who felt overlooked or underestimated. "Don't let anyone tell you that you're less than you are," he would say, holding up one of his carvings. This started as nothing more than a block of wood, but with patience, effort, and belief in yourself, you can turn it into something extraordinary. Over time, Ethan's influence extended beyond his art. He became a symbol of hope for those who dared to dream despite adversity. Teachers used his story to motivate students, parents cited him as proof that hard work pays off. And even Jake, now working alongside his father on the family farm, credited Ethan with teaching him the value of humility and respect. Years later, when asked about his journey during an interview, Ethan reflected on the hardships that had shaped him. "People often ask me if I'm angry about the bullying I faced as a kid," he said, pausing thoughtfully. "But honestly, I'm grateful. Those experiences taught me resilience. They forced me to dig deep and discover what I was truly capable of. Without them, I might never have realized my potential." He smiled softly, his gaze drifting to the window where sunlight streamed in, casting shadows on the walls. "You know, sometimes I think about that old oak tree where Jake broke my sparrow. It's funny. If he hadn't done that, I might never have pushed myself to create something greater. Pain can either break you or build you. For me, it became the foundation of everything I've achieved." As the interviewer thanked him and switched off the camera, Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. He had come a long way from the shy, dirt-streaked boy who walked home alone under the weight of cruel words. Now he stood tall, his creations admired by thousands, his spirit unbroken. And though he knew challenges would always arise, he faced them with the same quiet strength that had carried him through his darkest days. Because Ethan understood something fundamental. True success isn't measured by fame or fortune. It's measured by the lives you touch, the barriers you overcome, and the beauty you bring into the world even when no one expects